Okay,
Yes.
let's get started then. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining DataCon LA 2021. My name is Hannah, your host, and our co host today is Hestia. I'll hand this over to the moderator, Samta, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks, Hestia. Hello, everyone. I'm Samta Kapoor, Managing Director at Accenture, and very happy to be about to moderate this wonderful panel today. So we will be talking about real-world data and analytics journeys that have impacted public and private sector today. And when you board a flight and they say, "Hey, if this is not the destination you were supposed to be on, now would be a good time to get out of the flight." So if this is not the panel you were expecting, we're still going to talk about that. We have three panelists on here, as you see. Tom Hobbib, who's responsible for data and analytics services for San Diego Gas and Electric. Shaena Walker, who's responsible for data and asset strategy at SoCalGas. And Jennifer Womack is from the California Department of Public Health and is responsible for vaccine task force reporting and analysts. So a very big thank you to all of our panelists for being on and all of our participants. And we were just kind of going to talk a little bit about seeing how data and analytics is impacting all these different industries that our panelists come from, which is electric utility, gas utility, as well as the Department of Public Health. And of course, vaccines and COVID being on top of everyone's mind. Jennifer, why don't we start with you? And if you can help us understand how data and analytics is creating an impact in your industry and also what's next on the horizon, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So, data and analytics has been absolutely integral to public health in general, and then in particular in our COVID-19 vaccine response. So we've worked very hard to provide transparent vaccine reporting to the public, to our local health jurisdictions, and to our California state leadership. In California, from the frontline worker all the way up to our leadership, we have kept equity as our North Star in our COVID-19 response and in our COVID-19 vaccine response. And it's one thing to say that we want to prioritize equity, and it's another thing to publicly publish data that holds us accountable. So this has really been important, and we work hand in hand with our local health jurisdictions and with all of our providers. And so this has really helped us identify where we need to get vaccine, who is providing vaccine to, what areas, and where we need to do more outreach. So it's been absolutely integral.
Yeah, no, Jennifer, that's really exciting. And what you spoke about is very important, which is it's one thing to measure it internally and know what you're doing with equity, but it's another thing to be publishing that data and being accountable for what's happening. So that's a very, very important point. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about what's happening in the gas utility space?
Thank you, Samta. So what's really fascinating now is, we are a company that has been in business for about 150 years. So gas infrastructure has existed in SoCalGas since 1867. And we do have pipelines that are 150 years old. And so understanding using data-driven, analytics, how can we predict failures? We see in the news that, there are gas pipeline ruptures. How do we know that that's not going to happen in SoCalGas? And there is a huge amount of data, not only at our own utility, but from across the country around different triggers that might help us understand that. What is the material of the pipeline? What's the soil moisture level? Is there any kind of leak history? And using all of that data to inform how do we improve our maintenance strategies? So how frequently should we be doing leak surveys? What is cathodic protection going to do to protect our infrastructure to help it last longer? And most importantly, when should we be doing proactive repairs so that we are preventing any kind of hazard that could happen, before it happens, obviously. So data and analytics has been a huge asset at SoCalGas, and it's been great partnering with Accenture on this roadmap to kind of look at how do we leverage our tools and our data and the resources available to us to protect the community?
Thank you, Shaena. Yeah, the point you made about the pipelines being so ancient, like they've been there for such a long time, and it's really hard to know. Like you can't inspect every pipeline manually and like send people out there. So it becomes very critical to use data and AI to do that. So that's very insightful. Thank you. Tom, do you want to spare
Sure.
us?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Something. Thanks for having me as part of this panel. It's exciting to speak to everybody about this. Yeah, just like Shaena, I can cite the asset management. She was talking pipelines and SDG&E. We're both a gas and electric utility, but from the electric side, how we manage our assets, whether it's the transformers on the poles or the poles themselves or the underground assets. Predictive algorithms around asset health. I can't speak to 150-year-old pipelines, but we have poles that are 50, 60 years old. We have transformers hanging on those poles that are aging and other infrastructure. But the question is, okay, when do we inspect them? Do you inspect them on time, or do you inspect them based on condition or based on probability of failure? And when you start looking at broad service territories, and hard to access areas, the frequency of that inspection, the timing and everything else is really critical. So having asset health drive condition-based maintenance and inspections is a really critical aspect of what we're doing with data. In San Diego Gas and Electric, as an electric utility, one of the big things we're very sensitive to and on top of is wildfire risk mitigation. And we have invested heavily, as have the other California utilities, electric utilities, in terms of looking at data to minimize the risk of wildfire. We do a lot with weather data. We've actually come up with the Santa Ana Wildfire Threat Index. And so if you went out on and Googled SAWTI, you would look at your wildfire threat index for everywhere from San Diego all the way up to Santa Barbara. And you can look at what that index is. We've got a vegetation risk index. There's all sorts of indices. We're looking at even looking at satellite and looking at moisture in the ground. And from the vegetation perspective, we have millions. Starting last year, we started capturing drone imagery of our poles, and we're using machine learning to actually assess damages on those poles and using the results of that to prioritize our repairs, particularly in our high fire threat districts. So data and analytics is absolutely essential from a public safety perspective. And I think you heard that same theme from all three of us. What's next on the horizon? Because that was the second part of your question. Sustainability is a huge, huge area. We're looking at, where do we put electric vehicle charging stations? How do we, as a company, we have thousands of fleet vehicles. How do we electrify our fleet to reduce our carbon footprint? Where do we prioritize that? Where do we plant trees and partner with the community? And so there's a huge initiative in sustainability around climate equity. So how we are addressing climate equity in our underserved communities. And so that's kind of one of the next big domains. I didn't even talk about customer and how we will leverage, data and analytics, but artificial intelligence in terms of dealing with our customers, whether they're Alexa services, and allow customers to pay their bill via Alexa or have other interaction with the utility. There's a whole host of opportunities in the utility space. It's endless. There aren't enough people or dollars to really leverage those.
Yeah. No, those are great points, Tom. And what you rightly pointed out is what was going through my head as well. Everything that we spoke about now has direct impact to human life. So whether it's like making sure that the leaks don't happen, or wildfires are like we're managing our asset in a way that wildfires don't happen, or whether it's for vaccines for COVID-19, Jennifer, to what you were saying, right? I feel like all data and analytics can be used extensively to impact human life in a very positive way. So that was a great theme underlying it. The other question that I wanted to ask is, we spoke about all these examples and, how we can use data and AI to impact human lives. But I'm sure there are a lot of barriers that you have had to overcome, or there are a lot of challenges that you've seen when you've, tried to use data for everything that you mentioned. So Shaena, why don't we start with you for this time around to talk about what were the key things that you've experienced as challenges, and how would you overcome them?
So I think what's interesting in a utility is that we're not a fully private industry. We're very heavily regulated. So in a lot of ways, we function similar to a public industry, where our funding needs to be approved by regulators. And so if this were truly private industry, we might look at certain IT projects and say, this is a huge priority for us. Let's go all in and, spend this $400 million and blow out all these legacy systems that are siloed and don't talk to each other. But that would probably never get approved by our regulators, because we do need to keep rates low for our customers, and those costs will ultimately get passed through. And so what has been a challenge for us is, over the last few decades, we've been building these data systems, and their use cases have changed. In the 80s, no one ever really thought about how we'd be able to leverage the data that we'd be gathering. And so some of the tools that were built in the 80s and 90s, we're now taking information out of the back end of them and trying to use it to make data-driven decisions. So the challenge is, keeping these systems in place and trying to integrate across them and pull that data into a way that we can combine it all and use it for analytics. We're now, similar to what Tom was talking about with drone imagery, we are searching for any sort of methane sources using a LiDAR system on a helicopter. So we have helicopters flying over our service territory looking for methane sources. We also have stationary methane detectors, and we have our employees going out and performing manual leak survey. So we've got 3 different data sources coming in using 3 different technologies and going into 3 different systems. How do we layer that together to tell a compelling story about what is going on with our buried infrastructure? I'm a little jealous that Tom can see his infrastructure. Ours is all underground, so we have to take these invisible signals that we may have a problem. And so we've really been using a lot of different technology opportunities to kind of hub our data into different data lakes and learning how to transform it, and so that it can sit and be attached to an asset as opposed to kind of floating around, and also trying to transition into mobile data capture, because we still have areas in the company where we may be capturing data with a pen and pencil, someone noting something on a map that, hey, this is where we found the leak. And someone then has to transition that into, electronic data so that it can be used by machine learning and AI to help us make better decisions. So it's not a problem that we can solve overnight, but it has been an exciting challenge to learn how to do this.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, Shaena. So it's like bringing all these data sets together, whether they're structured or unstructured, from all these different sources, so that you can use advanced analytics on them then to draw your insights. So that's, yeah, I feel like we've seen that across industries as well, and a little more so in the utilities, just because of still some paper forms being used. But I completely agree, it's a pretty big challenge that needs to be solved and cannot be done overnight. 100% on board with that. Tom, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I'm going to go right back to the data as well. Not necessarily the disparate systems, but I'll just pick on the broad category of data governance. Data governance is a really it's a necessary evil, I guess. Governance itself is sometimes something that people shy away from, but the more automation we have with machine learning and everything else, it's garbage in, garbage out. And so you really want to be careful when you start getting into artificial intelligence and some more advanced analytics, that you're measuring your data quality up front. that you want quality data in so that you can inform your decisions. And so looking at things like data accuracy and completeness is really critical, and starting to measure that for your key functions. You can't do it across the board, but figuring out where to do that, but there's a lot of process and policy and process that sometimes companies are a little averse to doing. So working through that internally, who are the data owners, who are the stewards, we can measure it, who's going to do something about it, right? Because you want to force all those corrections upstream, so by the time the data gets to your lake or to your ML solutions, you've got you've got good data or enough data. So you've got to start measuring somewhere. We have a lot of cases, and I know Shaena's got it as well, where we might have a single term for a data element, but it means three different things to three different departments and people. I see smiles from the other panelists, right? And so what is that standard definition? What is the source of truth? You think about even from basic reporting and a KPI, right? An average handle time on a call might mean something very different or be measured in different ways in different organizations. So standardizing on some of those data definitions, defining the source of truth. And lastly is that data accessibility. People need to know what the source of truth is, where to find it. You don't want to go to Jane or Steve, right? You want to be able to go to a system to have that source of truth. So then not only letting people know where it is, but streamlining your access processes so that folks can get to the data while still protecting it, right? We still have privacy concerns and other sensitive data that we need to protect. I know healthcare in particular probably has to deal with that, right? But there is, to do analytics, you need to have access to more than just transactional data in your department. So data catalogs are a great way we're moving towards that. There's barriers, there's ways to get through, but there's a lot of change management on the governance side to really be effective there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, Tom. I think the governance is as important it is to bring quality data in, because like you said, it's a necessary evil. Sometimes the governance organizations are set up, but the whole feeling around that is they're going to obstruct what we are trying to do, but truly it's an enabler to make sure that you're getting good quality data and not like a naysaying organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, great points. Jennifer, what are your thoughts on this? What are the challenges that you're seeing?
I mean, I just felt for you, Thomas. It could have been public health. So our COVID-19 vaccine response, this is, it's been a paradigm shift of, what vaccine reporting was before the pandemic and after the pandemic. We weren't structured for, a global pandemic and needing to vaccinate every person in California, right? So this was not only a change in our IT structure, this was a change in attitudes that we had to get towards our providers, right? So now we're asking our providers to provide data in more timely manner, and we're looking at their data quality like we've never looked at it before. And the stakes couldn't be higher, right? So in California, we launched our digital COVID-19 vaccination record, which is a smart health card that people can pull up on their phones and show that they have been vaccinated with a full series. But to get that, you needed your email and your cell phone, right? And email and cell phone isn't something that we had, generally collected before. And we had to have this huge outreach back out to providers and to our pharmacies and say, this is super important. Otherwise your patients are going to come back to you and say, why can't I get my digital vaccine record? This is, we live in a global economy where people are assets and they're moving back and forth across borders. And to do that, we had to be able to establish that, we have been vaccinated. So, data quality can have, a very abstract form, but when you're the person that's going to travel to Aruba, right, for your honeymoon, and you have to have your digital vaccine record, but CVS didn't transmit your cell phone or your email, I mean, it puts a real face on, the importance of this data quality and data governance, and people's ideas about the importance of data. We had to expand very quickly in our COVID-19 response, and we have just been so grateful to have these private-public partnerships together, like with Accenture, that they came and they had the expertise and the knowledge, and were able to leverage our public health knowledge and their ability to get data out, and we would have been lost, right? I mean, it's just been fantastic.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jennifer. We, as you all were talking about this, I was thinking through, we've seen actually across industries, the other key thing that has come across is being able to scale AI. So while we're, data definitely has to be in place, and sometimes it's really hard to quantify the value that you get by building a strong foundation or a strong data governance arm. But I feel like when you come to the AI ML aspect, we're also hearing clients across industries talk about how do you scale it? Because it's one thing to be able to run POCs and do it in silos, but it's a whole different thing when you try to scale it across enterprises. So that's the other thing that came to mind. I know we have 6 minutes for the panel, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. But I did have a last question for all three panelists. What guidance would you share with our audience today on the key success enablers to maximize value that you can get from data and AI?
You want me to go first?
Yes, please. Tom.
Okay, sure. So I'll start with maybe a little of what not to do, maybe. I would recommend don't build it and they will come. Right? There's a lot that you can do with data. There's a lot of data all over the place. Really try to take more of a use case based approach and try to solve a real business problem. So it's important to ask the right questions. What are you going to do with this data? What decisions are you going to make? Why will that matter? Right? So asking a lot of those questions up front will kind of validate the value of the business case for that, because there's a lot of different solutions that you can build with data. So kind of focus in on that use case driven one. I would be cautious about chasing tools and technology. There's a lot of shiny objects out there. There's a lot of vendors that are going to dangle stuff in front of you and everything else. There's some tried and true stuff, and there's a lot of open source that's that you don't have to make a huge investment in. And so it's not about the tools and technology. It's about the data, and it's about the problems that you're trying to solve. And the last thing I think I'll make a comment I'll make on this is it's your data. And remember, it's your data. There's a lot of companies that say, well, if you just give us your data, we can give you all these great results and answers. Own your data, own the solutions to your data. I'm not saying that those companies aren't valuable and can't, if your data is combined with other data in the industry, right? I'm sure the healthcare data, as we look at it at a state level and compare that across the country, those are things that we need to do from a public health perspective, right? But even within your company, just be careful with that would be my caution, because companies, everybody wants your data. So just be careful.
Those are really, really good advices, Tom. And you rightly said, don't build it and then they will come. First, let them come and then build it, because that leads to a lot of data versus like actual data lakes that are usable, and a lot of technical debt that you probably don't want to undertake anyway. It's a great point. Jennifer, what are your thoughts on this?
We have very passionate people who work in public health, and people who do this work, and from the bottom to the top, just having people believe in the mission of what you're doing and why everything is so important, because at the end of the day, I mean, it is people behind the data. So we put a lot of trust and effort into everybody that works with public health, and our public and private partners, from our pharmacy partners to our long-term care facilities. Communicating that story of why data is so important is it's invaluable, right? Because if you can make a difference at the person level, then they can see that, the way that they data enter something has an impact on the public health of like their whole state and their whole nation. I mean, you create a convert to the importance of of data quality and the so yeah, I would say making sure that you tell the story of the importance of your data. It just can't be underestimated.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, Jennifer, because that's not only a key aspect to get buy-in within the organization, but it's very important to be able to externally communicate like the value that your data is giving you. So data storytelling is definitely a key aspect of what we should keep in mind as we go forward and build those data lakes and get our data cleaner. Shaena, what are your thoughts on that?
I really agree with everything that Jennifer said. Something that we struggle with is there are a lot of use cases for a system. So we have a lot of stakeholders, and so that change management process of bringing them all together and helping them understand why we need to change the tools that we're using, why we, back to Tom's discussion on data governance, why do we need to change what we're going to call something? Because we have systems that have been used in operations for years that were used just to track compliance, and the data that we're getting on the back end is not useful. It's scanned papers saying, yep, we did this survey, it was done, this is who did it, end of story, it was fine. And we want more information. We want to know, like, what tool did you use, what time of day did you do this, what were your findings, not just that it was completed, but what did you see, what did you find? And operations, it still meets their needs, so they don't want to change systems. They have no problem with the tool at all. But then on the back end, risk is becoming so important. Risk modeling and using data to kind of drive our understanding of our system. We need better data. And while it may not matter to them, it does matter to other departments, and it does matter to the company. So ultimately, I think this is a really great opportunity for us to work with all groups and educate them on why data is important, and bring them along for the ride. We don't want to build it and wait for them to come, but we do want to talk to them and say, hey, we're thinking about building something, and this is why we want to build it. What do you think about this? What are your concerns? And how can we bring you on this adventure with us to make sure that all your needs are met, and this will be, a smooth execution?
Yeah, hey, I just want to jump in real quick. Oh, got some feedback. Yeah, Shaena, to your point, as IT organizations are implementing systems, one of the things that I found really useful is getting involved, or at least having conversations with all of those projects to make sure that the applications teams are looking at the downstream implications of their data, of the changes, and if they're not, starting to ask the questions, why not, and how can that data be used downstream and leveraged? Because it's not just the isolated. I thought that was a great example, Shaena, that where there's one use that it was originally intended for, but there's so much more that we can do with the data, right? And it's the same thing, Jennifer. I was like, okay, yeah, I got a shop, but okay, but we need the address and the phone number, right? The phone number and the email. It's not just yes or no, you got a shop. So the metadata around a lot of our transactions is really critical from an analytics perspective.
Right. No, absolutely, Tom. And I think the other thing that caught my attention also is the training aspect that you spoke about, Shaena, because I think that becomes very important as well. Like, you bring the stakeholders up front, but you also have to make sure that they are trained, and there's this big culture change or attitude change, Jennifer, like you pointed out, that needs to happen along the way. Otherwise, it's really lost, and the value of usage of data doesn't really come out. So those were great points. Thank you so much. We have two questions from our audience. The first one is for you, Jennifer. The question is, it would be interesting to understand the parameters the state measures equitable vaccine distribution on, and how that impacts public and community health.
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. So we have what we call our Healthy Places Index, and for the state of California. So by zip code, we have classified whether a place is less healthy or more healthy. And so we've put these into our 4 quartiles, the fourth quartile being healthier and our first quartile being less healthy. And they do correlate with socioeconomic, parks, environmental health, access to providers. And so we were really concerned, when the vaccine first rolled out, and it was, it was very scarce resource. So we were, following national guidelines, and it was first going to our healthcare workers and our emergency responders, and then to the 65 plus. But, when we looked at the data and evaluated it by our Healthy Places Index, we noticed that it was going more towards quartile 4, that, people were traveling to get vaccine, right? So people in wealthier areas were traveling to get a vaccine shot, where our HPI quartile 1 was being left behind. So our state, not only were we publishing this on the data, and we're evaluating it by age, race, ethnicity, and by HPI quartile, our leadership looked at this and said, we have to make equity our North Star, and we are going to make sure that, there's equal access to vaccine. And so we not only went about pushing more vaccine into quartile 1, but we worked with providers, we worked with prematuras, and we worked with community-based organizations to get out the word. So publishing our data and analytics, has real policy impacts and impacts the citizens of California. So we leveraged it, and I think, we have decreased that delta between HPI 4 and quartile 4 and quartile 1. And that is a direct result of, analyzing your data and, presenting it to the public, holding ourselves accountable, and using it.
Thank you, Jennifer. We do have one more question that I will direct to all 3 of our panelists, because I think it is very applicable. And that would be the last question that we would have time to take. So I apologize for missing a few. But what advice can you give to someone that wants to pursue a career in data and analytics? Tom, do you want to take that first?
Sure. Well, there's obviously a lot of different avenues to get educated and get skilled up. I would say, you don't have to hit the home run right away and be this, whiz bang Python or machine learning programmer and an expert in AI. Start small, start with, being able to tell a story with data. So something as simple as visualizations and descriptive statistics on, making, Power BI, reporting, or some simple tool like that, just to start telling a story with data. And then you can kind of advance on from there. There's a lot of training available. There's a lot of courses. If you're looking at kind of more formal university programs, I would say, pick a program that's got a very good university industry partnership, because what you'll really want to do is get some internship opportunities and do project opportunities where you're working with real world companies, because they'll give you, really great experience and exposure to a lot of different things that you might not get in a purely academic setting.
No, that's great advice, Tom. Shaena, what are your thoughts?
So I never pursued a career in data and analytics. I'm a chemical engineer by training, and I ended up here because we actually really struggled finding people with data and analytics backgrounds that understood the business side. So our leadership strategy was the opposite: is let's find someone who understands the business needs and see if we can get them to learn data and analytics. And so my steps when that transition happened was to reach out to some of our really strong, data analytics contributors that have a great reputation for being able to execute on projects and understanding that relationship between business and systems. And I asked them, like, should I try and do like an online master's program or get a certificate? Like, how far behind am I that I don't have this, education and background that you guys do? And we talked through some of the problems that we've been facing on the business side, and it was interesting hearing their responses. And they're like, no, like, this actually sounds like you have a lot of process issues. Everything that you're going to need to be able to be effective in this role, you will be able to learn from your peers. It wasn't about education. It was really about understanding the goals and being able to select really strong performers too. We have business partners, vendors that we can work with that can help us in the actual building of the tools and advising us on that. We also have really smart programmers internally, so helping guide them to understand the business problems is where you'll add the most value. And so it's been a great learning experience. And I applaud all of you who are, really strong on the IT side, because it is not easy, but it is so, so important. So I highly recommend pursuing a career in this area, because the more talented people we can get in this field, the better off we all are.
Yeah. We at Accenture are always looking for talented people. So anyone interested, look at our website. Jennifer, what is your advice?
I would say just to never stop learning, right? I learn new languages and programming languages and ways to better visualize data. There's so many resources out there, free and moderately priced, and your peers, right? Like, every time I come against an obstacle, there's some board someplace where somebody else has already thought about this, right? And it's such a rich environment. The data science world is really great. And I think being able to bridge data and people is a thing that we can't undercount, right? Because behind data is people, and you're going to be working with them regardless. It's not the programmer in the basement anymore. You're on a team. You're working with people. You have to be able to, manage interactions with people and tell your story so that they want to work with you. So that would be mine.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And thank you everyone for your time. I know we're at time now, Hestia, so I will hand it back over to you. I hope this panel was as exciting to you as it was to me. So thank you to our audience and panelists once again.
Thank you for having us.
Samta.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for the really awesome presentation. It was very good.
Absolutely. Thank you for the insightful conversation. And to the attendees for the questions as well. It's been great. Well, thank you everyone for joining today's panel. Please provide your feedback using the form that will be provided in the chat box, and have a wonderful day. And thank you for being part of this year's DataCon LA. All right.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.